Well, hello, everyone. It's Jason here. I'm one of the pastors at the Way Church, and I want to welcome you to today's sermon. I don't know where you find yourself, but it's a delight for our team whenever we hear stories of people being strengthened in their walk with God, discovering more about Jesus and His Word through these messages. So just wanted to say hello before we jump in and hope that you enjoy.
I'll be reading from Exodus 20, verses 1 to 17. And God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt and out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but on the seventh day is the Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them. But he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Honor your father and your mother, so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, nor his male or female servant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor.
It's so nice to be here. It has been since August, which feels really funny for me. Many of you I don't know, but it's just such a pleasure to open the scriptures together today. And as Jason said, I've been in North Vancouver, and in September we started a second service there, and so it's made it really hard to get over. But brief report, the church is growing in North Van, and people are finding healing and transformation. We just put up Christmas lights. Big deal. Our gardening stuff in the front got finished. For those of you who've been and seen that unfinished, it's done, and it's beautiful. And today, Chris and I decided to swap. They miss Chris over there, but I hear he's been preaching a lot here. So I'm thankful to be here and to be teaching today. We are in the series on the 10 Commandments, and today we're looking at Commandment 9, which means we're pretty close to the end. And this is the command. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. The 10 Commandments cast vision for living our lives in sync with God, our Creator. The 10 Commandments cast vision for living a life in sync with God and with one another. Like it's about how do we live as God's people on the earth? What does it look like to walk together in a way that honors Him? Jesus said this, he said a lot of wild things. He said one wild thing, he said, all the law, not just the 10 Commandments, but all the law and prophets hang on 2 commands. Love God and love your neighbor. And that's also true in this command. Don't bear false witness against your neighbor. It is encapsulated in what's it really about. It's really about loving God, living like He exists, like His presence is everywhere, like He matters, and He is truth. That matters. And then it's about loving our neighbor as ourselves. It's about caring more about the other than just our name and our experience. And so this commandment certainly hangs on these two. Not bearing false witness against one another is a way to love God. And it's a way to see community thrive. We don't always think about this idea, but every relationship we have needs rules to flourish. Every roommate situation, this is true. Don't leave dishes in the sink. I'm letting it soak only goes so far and for so long. Don't host a Saturday morning brunch when your roommate just worked a night shift. Take garbage out when it's full. And if rules like this are consistently broken, resentment builds and the relationship can sour. Similarly, every friendship has rules like basic ones: keep my secrets, text back at least eventually, and more on the nose, like don't defame me or embarrass me behind my back. Call them guidelines, call them rules, whatever we call them, they do exist. And in healthy relationships, these rules aren't burdensome or unnecessarily restrictive. Their goal is always to bring life and to bring health to the relationship. And as I hope we've been seeing in this study in the Ten Commandments, the same is true with all of them. The same is true. Some think Christianity is about a relationship with God and is therefore not about rules. But because Christianity is about a relationship with God, there actually must be rules. To quote Jen Wilkin, the Christian faith is absolutely about relationships. But while that faith is personal, it is also communal. We are saved into a special relationship with God and thereby into a special relationship with other believers. Christianity is about a relationship with God and others, and because this statement is true, Christianity is also unapologetically about rules. For rules show us how to live in those relationships rather than threaten relationships. Rules enable them. And one of the rules God gives us for living as his people in relationship with others is the 9th commandment. You shall not bear false witness against a neighbor. Even before we study it, I don't think it's hard for us in this room to imagine and to already begin to think about the ways that the breaking of this command ruins community. Like speaking falsely about others behind their back. We've all experienced this to some degree, and it's devastating. God is passionate about the truth, and so he calls us to speak the truth and to speak the truth about others. Maybe some of you in the room have specifically experienced the devastating results of someone else's breaking of this command towards you. And in my years of living in Christian community, I feel like I've seen the breaking of this command destroy community more than almost anything else. But to help us better understand it, I want to look at 4 things today. These are them. Firstly, what the command meant in its original context, very important. Secondly, how we know the command goes beyond just this original context. Thirdly, what the command means for us today. And then we're going to look at where we can find hope when the command has been broken. So firstly, what did the command mean in its original context? The original setting of this command was legal in nature. You can almost feel it in the language. This commandment was meant for the courtroom setting. In fact, the Hebrew words used are technical terms that refer to presenting evidence in a trial, and in this case, presenting fraudulent or deceptive evidence. And in a day where there were no video cameras to catch anything, everything relied on personal witness to a situation, eyewitness credibility. And we get this, like an eyewitness stands and gives testimony about a situation, and when they do, they have a lot of power. They have, through what they're saying about the situation that they saw or observed, they have the power to either bring a lot of harm to somebody's life or to bring blessing or even freedom. And to give false testimony in a situation like this harms your neighbor quite explicitly and obviously. And so God simply commands us, never do this. And it makes a lot of sense why God would. Never bear false witness in court in a way that might bring harm to your neighbor, because God judges justly. He's fair. God would never bear false witness, so neither should his people. We get the logic. An Old Testament scholar, Christopher Wright, points it out like this. He says, the commandment is not simply about telling the truth in general, but about telling the truth in the place where it counts most, because that is where lying can cost the most, in the court of law. Elsewhere in the Mosaic law, there are safeguards against bearing false witness in court. This was like a really big deal to God. It says in Deuteronomy 19:15, when possible, the testimony of someone had to be confirmed by 2 or 3 witnesses. The word of one person was not always enough. If the possibility of more than one witness existed, it was to be pursued and then taken into consideration. Another safeguard that existed was that if the witness was caught bearing false testimony, this one's pretty intense, the witness must endure the punishment they wanted or sought for the accused. That could get gnarly. If safeguards like this existed in today's justice system, we would certainly think even harder before ever fabricating a story or telling a lie or slandering the innocent in the court of law. So the original context in this command referred to a legal setting. So, I mean, the question, and we visited this quite a bit in this series, is like, okay, we get it. Like, don't bear false witness in court. But is that it? Like, is that the fullness of what this means? Don't lie in court. To be sure, the command still applies to court. Either in person or on our show or on the news, we've all experienced this. In fact, last night, we've all seen this. Last night I got home from the Canucks game, which was a tough one, but it's been a great season. So just shake it off. So I literally did. I got home and I was just trying to shake it off. And I opened my laptop and I tried to gather my thoughts to get my heart in the right place for this morning. And Nick and Becca and Sarah, who I live with, and Nick and Becca were watching some show. And I hear in the background, like they're just, I don't know what show it was, but I just hear, do you swear that the evidence you shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I'm like, there it is. That's what I'm talking about tomorrow. And so that helped my mind get around it. And so we see this, like we're aware of that idea. Like, okay, there's a fear of God in a courtroom setting, and we should be aware that our words matter a lot, even that language that's still used in many settings. So help me God. But is there more to it? I think there is more to it, or else this would have been about a 7.5-minute sermon. But I think there is. So secondly, how do we know this command goes beyond its original context? And actually for a number of reasons. For one, because through the rest of Scripture, this command is extended beyond the literal courtroom into the realm of everyday human relationships. You hear it talked about alongside of everyday examples. Like you hear this language of don't bear false witness right alongside things like lying and slander and gossip. Leviticus riffs on the 10 Commandments, and we find the extension of it sounds like this in Leviticus 19, 11, and 12. Do not steal, do not lie, do not deceive one another, do not swear falsely by my name. And then in Leviticus 19, 16, you shall not go about as a slanderer. In Proverbs 6, 16 to 19, it says this. And even before I read it, this passage has always struck me in relation to how passionate God is about the truth and how much he hates lies. It says there are 6 things the Lord hates. This is 5, 6. 7 that are detestable to him: haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked schemes, feet that are quick to rush into evil, a false witness who pours out lies, and a person who stirs up conflict in the community. You see the extension of it. This text highlights the heart of the God who gave the commandment, which is what we got to get after whenever we're studying these laws and commands. To bear false witness goes against his very nature because he's truth. To bear false witness is anti-Christ. He hates lies. He hates when things are done that ruin community. You can hear his heartbeat in that text in Proverbs. He hates the stirring up of conflict. And false witnessing does that. Can I get an amen? I mean, we do that a lot in North Bend. I don't know if it's as popular here. They love it. And then the New Testament has lots to say about our words, specifically about slander, gossip, and lying. James chapter 4, verse 11, brothers and sisters, do not slander one another. Anyone who speaks against a brother or sister or judges them speaks against the law and judges it. When you judge the law, you're not keeping it, but sitting in judgment on it. This text is so clearly connected to the 9th commandment. And then Ephesians 4, 29 through 31. Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths. Some of you got that rebuke growing up a few times around the dinner table. Sarah and I did. But only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. And do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God, with whom you were sealed for the day of redemption. Get rid of all bitterness, rage, anger, brawling, and slander, along with every form of malice. I think this has got to be one of the most helpful antidote texts for the sin of slander. Don't let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouth. A really unique teaching of Jesus that I actually got to teach on in our Sermon on the Mount series has ended up shaping my view of the ninth commandment quite drastically. And I want to be as bold as to say I imagine that it shaped his original disciples' view of it as well. In Matthew 23, Jesus gets really angry with a bunch of religious leaders who were basically categorizing the seriousness of words spoken based on what they swore by. So they would go, well, when you swear by heaven, it's about this amount of serious, you know? And then swearing by the temple meant something different. But then swearing in God's name, like that stuff you got to keep. But Jesus was not pumped about this type of vow making. He was against, and the idea is that he was against vow making that allowed people to separate or compartmentalize their worlds. He hated this. And this is what we tend to do as humans. We compartmentalize. We swear by God in court and understand maybe that our words carry weight there, but we then fail to realize our words against others carry weight in every other space as well. God knows in court and not in court, our words can destroy and our words can bring life. Jesus hates when we create imaginary worlds that pretend there are times we're accountable to God, and then there are times that we're not. There's times that we're accountable, and then there's times that we're off the hook. He hates this because the logic of this kind of thinking is that God is somehow more involved when we choose him to be more involved. And it's bad theology. It's bad theology. Now, I, of course, get why we've done this in the court of law. It makes a ton of sense. I get why we swear the way we do. The idea is, it's actually fascinating if you think about it. The idea is to emphasize the fear of the Lord in a particular space, in a particular moment that really does matter. Like, that's the idea. But for Jesus, this kind of thinking fails to acknowledge what's true about the universe. What's true about the universe is the whole cosmos is God's courtroom. And this truth should expand the boundaries of the ninth commandment in our hearts and our minds. This is the mindset that followers of Jesus need to have as we consider the ninth commandment. Lies may deceive others, they never deceive God. Slander may defame others and may make you look good for a time, but slander never changes God's perspective, and it never changes what's actually true. What we say at someone else's expense may for a time make our lives easier, but lies and bearing false witness move us away from alignment with God. They push us away from him, and they fight against the world he longs to establish. The ninth commandment is given not just for legal situations. The ninth commandment is given so that we may live. So with this in mind, I think we can better approach the question that is the third point. What does this command mean for us today? What does this command mean for us today? I do think generally it means that we should treat every moment like a courtroom moment. There's a specificness and a sacredness to those spaces and a seriousness, but I think the invitation, as I already said, for us as followers of Jesus is to grow in our capacity to comprehend every moment as a courtroom moment in the sense that we realize every moment we stand in the presence of God. We live and speak in the presence of God, who knows that words matter. I think it could be helpful for us to imagine all our private gathering spaces as mini courtrooms, whether Zoom rooms or living rooms or boardrooms or coffee shops. No matter where we're at, what we say about others is serious. Our words have power, and they are said in the presence of God. And I think thinking this way is a really good way to start. I think it's a good thing to come alongside one another and go, how can we help one another think that more? For me, I've started to kind of redeem the whole praying before a meal thing. in my own heart, because I'm like, oh, I always did that as a kid, and then like, why do we always do that? Does it just kind of get stuffy or whatever? I'm like, one thing to pray before a meal or pray before a conversation is just, God, we recognize you're here right now. That's a great thing. It's a thing that will begin to help us think about our words more wisely. God, we acknowledge you're present. You're very much here, and we want to be aware of you. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and that's what we're getting at here. Sometimes we slander and bear false witness knowingly. Sometimes we do it totally ignorantly. Sometimes we do it out of malice, and sometimes we do it out of a simple lack of discipline, just sloppiness, laziness, a casualness about the things we're saying. Regardless, what God knows is that what is said within our many courtrooms does not remain there. Words against others have power, and what is said behind closed doors affects people on the outside. We all know that if we have bad credit, it can follow us around. You go try to get financing or get a loan, and that idea of bad credit, it's like, oh, this kind of feels like it's following me everywhere. And it can be super frustrating. And a bad reputation can do the same thing socially. It ends up following us around. It limits us in certain social circles. It impacts all our interactions and how we're perceived. Slander can spoil people's identities and lead to an experience of isolation. So we want to grow in just an acknowledgement that our words matter and they affect things. But what does this command mean more practically? In some ways, preparing this talk was overwhelming to think about all the ways in which this command gets into the nitty-gritty of our lives. It applies to a ton of things, but I want to spend a few minutes looking at a few specifics, like where the rubber meets the road kind of thing. So here's a thought. This command means we shouldn't make or join in on sweeping generalizations about people. They don't care. They're flaky. They and their spouse have a rough relationship. He's so arrogant. All they think about is politics. They're all about themselves. Oh, trust me, they're not following Jesus. These types of generalizations may be partly true. They're rarely fully true. They're blanket statements that paint people in a very specific light, and they are dangerous words, though we're often very casual about them as statements. These are not thoughtful testimonies about other human beings. They're lazy generalizations that grow wings and do more damage than we could ever fathom. Another thought, the command means we shouldn't tell half-truths about others, which we're doing, I feel, as I've searched my heart. Like we say things, in some ways a small example, but we say things like, they didn't reach out or make any effort. But sometimes we say things like that in kind of a more extreme way to get someone to sympathize with us, but the truth of the situation was a little different. Like maybe the person did reach out in some way, they were just too late, or it wasn't in the way that we hoped they would. And in these moments, we're bearing false witness too, or we say they bailed last minute, but the bailing last minute was they got sick, or we forgot to follow up till an hour before. But we say things like this because it kind of makes us look better in the moment, putting the blame, we put the blame fully on someone else, so we look like the innocent party. This is just kind of this human tendency, and I think it's part of what it means to bear false witness. And then this command also addresses the more sinister forms of false witness. The command means we should never maliciously defame a person through falsehood. And there's this one part of this statement, it's like, of course. But as I've been preparing this talk and considering conversations with friends and journeying with people over the years, it's unbelievable how often this has happened in my friends' lives, in people's lives, in many of your lives. Like, not just kind of like, oops, that was a slip up, like malicious lies to bring somebody else down. I had a friend years ago who was a deeply committed member of a leadership team for an international organization, and he had been for years. And then he became aware of real, brutal moral compromise of a leader involved in that ministry. And so he graciously, humbly, but firmly approached the leadership team to bring this to them and share his concern. And what happened is he was cut off from the staff, and people shared lies about him and made up stories about why he left the organization to save face and protect themselves. And it led one of the most integrous people I've ever known into one of the deepest seasons of loneliness imaginable. It led his wife into depression. This stuff is sick, and it's real. It's happened to some of you, and I'm so sorry. It's a breaking of the 9th commandment. Walter Brueggemann says this about bearing false witness. Politicians seek to destroy one another in negative campaigning. Gossip columnists feed off of slander. And in Christian living rooms, reputations are tarnished or destroyed over cups of coffee served in fine china with dessert. These de facto courtrooms are conducted without due process of law. Accusations are made, hearsay allowed, slander, perjury uttered without objection. No evidence, no defense. As Christians, we must refuse to participate in or to tolerate any conversation in which a person is being defamed or accused without the person being there to defend themselves. It is wrong to pass along hearsay in any form, he says, even as prayer requests or pastoral concerns. More than merely not participating, it is up to Christians to stop rumors and those who spread them in their tracks. I couldn't agree more. And I so appreciate this unique thing he highlights in the last comment about stopping rumors, which I think leads just to another thing that this means for us practically. The command means we should grow in the art and grace of stopping slander and false testimony when we hear it. Super fun to do. No. But by the grace of God and the Spirit of God, this is something we need to do. Because of how much this command's broken. It takes courage. It might mean being understood, but as Christians, we should not only refrain from bearing false witness, we shouldn't enter into it when we hear it from others, and we should engage in the work of stopping rumors whenever possible. One more thought about what this command means for us, and I think it's a real important one. This command means we should be slow to speak about things we know little about. And honestly, we should be slow to speak in general. Scripture teaches this, but as I've personally considered this command, I have felt convicted about how much I say. I'm a talker. If you don't know me, I just love chatting, love externally processing, verbally processing things. But I am too often overly confident about things I've not looked into or that I don't know enough about. When prepping sermons, I spent a lot of time considering what I'm about to say in front of all of you. I write it all out, I pray about it, friends look over the manuscript, I edit it, and then I edit it again. But that's not most of life. In most of life, that's not the case. Yet my words have power in every setting I find myself. A great takeaway from this talk would just be to say less things about people in general. Proverbs 10:19 says, too much talk leads to sin. Be sensible and keep your mouth shut. This is the word of the Lord. This has gotten particularly bad in the online world. This is a bit embarrassing, but I've gotten a bit of a habit of sometimes just scrolling comment sections because I'm like, you see a post, you're like, oh, is this gonna be wild? And it's not a great habit. I don't encourage it. But man, it is crazy what people say so confidently about other human beings who bear the image of God. Usually about people they don't know. And it's clear that many people and many Christians have given no thought to the fact that words spoken online are said in the courtroom of God and words online have power. People make such definitive statements about human beings in comment sections, in posts, in text messages, in blogs. And my general point is that when we're making comments about others, we should be careful no matter where those comments are being made. Many of us in the room, including myself, need to grow in the discipline of saying less. So, that's some of what it means. That's some of what it means to obey the 9th commandment, to live into it. And like me, you're probably feeling pretty aware of how often this command is broken. It's helped our imaginations. Like, you know what? This happens all the time. So what I'd like to do now is talk about how we find hope when the command is broken. And we'll look at it from a few different angles. I think we often lie as people because we're afraid. I think we often put others down just to feel a bit better about ourselves. We spin a story in our favor to make ourselves look more in the right than the other person we're talking about. And we're trying to hold our image intact. And I think most of this stems from our deep desire to be accepted, to be loved, to be something. I think it stems from our need for affirmation, our need for a sense of worth and significance as people. And what will change our relationship with lying, I think, is a deep understanding that we don't have to make ourselves lovable. We're already loved. We don't have to make anyone else seem smaller in order to feel a sense of significance and security. Our acceptance is not dependent on whether or not we can prove our worth. And when we fully believe these truths, I really believe our relationships with other people and how we talk about them will change. The lies we all believe, the lie we all believe that leads us to lie is that in order to be loved, accepted, and significant, we at times have to take matters into our own hands. We have to save ourselves. And what's been most revelatory for me in preparing this talk is this thought, that in bearing false witness against another, I am often trying to create a world where I seem better than I am, less guilty than I am. Because I think that if people really know the real me, then I'll be rejected. So I'm always on the job, trying to prop myself up and make myself something. If I get fully found out, I won't be loved anymore. So I feel like I have to hold my sense of self-worth together through the stories I tell. But the more I do this, and this is the thought that's been revelatory, the more I do this, the more I distance myself from God and the gospel. The more I try to manage things and make it all work for me, the more I actually create distance between myself and God. God commands us to not bear false witness because it hurts people he loves and because it destroys community. It's anti-kingdom of God. But I also think he hates it because it creates a world that reinforces the idea that we have to be our own saviors. And this way of thinking is the opposite of what God wants for us, because it keeps us from coming to him. It keeps us from dependency. It keeps us from as soon as we're honest with ourselves, we're like, I need covering. Somehow, I need someone to cover my shame. But if we're not honest, we can pretend enough to make it seem and almost convince ourselves that we don't need that covering. What's hopeful about this, you might ask? What's hopeful is that the more we know the God who's spoken these commands, the less we will feel a need to break them. What's hopeful is that when we're fully honest, we will not be rejected by the God who calls us to be honest. That's hopeful. That's good news. When we realize that God covers our shame and calls us his own, we will no longer feel the need to put others down in order to feel a sense of significance. And when we stop lying, we have to face the truth. And so the real honest thing here, if this is a thing that you're wrestling through, is that when we stop lying, we do have to face the truth, and that is terrifying. Because the truth may lead to some form of rejection, especially if the lies run deep. It probably will. But it will also lead you to God, who loves you and will not reject you when you come to him. As Tim Keller has famously said, the gospel is this: we're more sinful and flawed in ourselves than we ever dare believe, yet at the very same time, we're more loved and accepted in Jesus Christ than we ever dared hope. So for those who might be addicted to this kind of lifestyle, or who might be flirting with this kind of lifestyle, know there's hope for you. God will not reject you. Honesty will not ruin you, because he will be there to build you up. And you'll find a peace that you're not living in now. But then how do we find hope if we have been sinned against in this way? Some of you have had the experience of being lied to or lied about, as I've referenced a few times. It is so painful. Sometimes we're lied about in such a way that we can pursue legal action. We have access to courts and the legal system to pursue justice. That's not always wrong. But in the case of Jesus, in the case of many Christians around the world, there's no opportunity for this. There's no access to courts or a means of earthly justice. For many of us, the ways in which we have been slandered or lied about have no legal recourse either. It's ex-lovers, friends, people with ill intent who've spread rumors, misrepresented us, created no end of trouble, and we can't fix it. We can't piece it back together. It's a tragedy. We can't straighten out what has been made crooked. And so where is our hope found then? And the answer is that it's found in the person of Jesus. Jesus was falsely accused. Jesus was slandered. As it says in 1 Peter 2:23, when they hurled their insults at him, he did not retaliate. When he suffered, he made no threats. Instead, this is the key meditation for this morning. Instead, he entrusted himself to him who judges justly. Jesus did not respond in kind. He didn't mirror the evil he found in the hearts of humans. He didn't respond to evil with evil, leaving the world with more evil. If we respond to lies with lies, it just leads to more lies. If I respond to slander with slander, it just leads to more slander. Jesus didn't respond to evil with evil. Instead, Jesus entrusted himself to him who judges justly. And what happened in the end? What happens when in weakness and vulnerability we entrust ourselves to the one who judges justly? When things aren't fair, and they're often not, what happens? What happened to Jesus? God vindicated Jesus through the resurrection that we celebrate and get our hearts and minds around every Sunday that we gather. God told the world that Jesus was in the right. The crucifixion of Jesus tells us that Jesus identifies with all of us who've been slandered unjustly and falsely accused. The cross is Jesus saying, me too. I know what it's like to be lied about, slandered and falsely accused by people with ill intent. I know what it is to have malicious rumors spread about me, Jesus could say. But the resurrection of Jesus tells us that truth will win out in the end. We have to hold on to this as followers of him. Truth will win out in the end. Though we live in a world corrupted by lies, reputations are tarnished. As we hold to him, our faith says truth will win out in the end. Jesus was vindicated in the end, and so will all those who trust in Jesus be vindicated. Lies will be exposed, our faith says. Truth will win, our faith says. Justice will prevail because of the resurrection. I'm genuinely sad for all the ways that breaking this commandment has affected many in this room. Some of you had chats with this week, and because I said I'm a verbal processor, you've been forced to chat with me about my sermon. And then stories come up. It's a very real thing. But be encouraged today that our faith says that those lies will not have the last word. Jesus will. We hold to that. One final thought to spark hope in our community today. When we as God's people refrain from slander, when we live out of a place of security and speak life over people rather than death, when we live with humility and when we readily admit our dependence on God, we build the kingdom on earth. We build the kingdom in Vancouver. The invitation for us is to participate in the kingdom of God by leaning into the countercultural practices of not bearing false witness and telling the truth. As we spurn opportunities to bear false witness and live into truth speaking, we put on display the character and person of God. And every time we do, we're cultivating little pockets of kingdom in a world that isn't fully kingdom yet. So let us choose to use our words differently. Let us use our words to build up instead of tear down, to speak truth and life, to bear true witness to all that is good and beautiful and right. And when we do, we will shine like a city on a hill. We will stand out in the best way. We will become signposts of a new world that is coming. One world where there will be final freedom from the tyranny of being our own gods.
Well, I want to thank you for listening to today's sermon. I'm Jason. I'm one of the pastors at the Way Church. And if you want to find out more about what's going on in the life of our church or how to get connected more deeply, you can go to thewaychurch.ca. We're so encouraged to hear stories about how these messages have been strengthening people in their walk with God, drawing them deeper in their relationship with Him and in His Word. And so this is love from our team to you. Hope you're doing well today and love to hear from you.